simultaneous speed networking and virtual booths, which you can join. Again, the link for that will be sent sporadically throughout the day. For our next topic on the agenda, we have the pleasure of watching a pre-recorded chat between Jean-Christophe and Koen. So Jean-Christophe is an experienced CFO, and he will share his journey from the financial services industry into other areas such as tech and healthcare. So let's begin, and I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Hey, Jean-Christophe, I'm very pleased to have you here today in the RegPac RegTech Summit, and I'm pleased to do this interview. It's not my first time, it's actually my second time, so it's not something new for us, but I know you had an extremely interesting career. Can you please explain us a little bit what that was?
Yeah, Koen, very pleased to be there and do that interview with you again. So basically, I started my career back in '92 at JP Morgan before I moved into Bank of New York Mellon in '95. I stayed there till 2012. I've been the CFO and I'm a member of the executive committee of the European subsidiary. Then I went for 1 year, more or less, into the insurance business before I joined, surprisingly, an entertainment company for about 9 months. And in there, that's when I started to connect the dot, because as CFO and CRO, I noticed that there were a lot of similarities between entertainment and the banking industry, believe it or not. Then I moved back to my first experience and moved back into the banking industry. Did a little bit of consulting. I've been working and active into the wealth management business, and I still have some activities into the private equity sector that are basically fading down a bit. And I've spent most of my time in a FinTech project that has, of course, a lot of RegTech components into it.
But what strikes me obviously the most, and it struck me already once when we were writing together the RegTech Black Book. Well, what RegTech means for me is something completely different for you. But what does it really mean for you? If you had to give a definition and a couple of words about RegTech, what do you understand about this?
RegTech is a term that is very well charted into the financial industry, right? But I think that RegTech is to be taken at the etymologic sense of the term, which is any kind of tool that allows a company to comply with the rules and regulations. And when you take it that way, it is extremely wide. It's something that with the time you see is evolving because of the use of data, because of underlying trends in the society. And it's something that I think will really literally explode in the coming years because of these underlying trends. So I'm going to give you an example. We talked about entertainment. If you have a show that is using a lot of water, basically a swimming pool, you need to control the quality of your water. And before you know it, it's something where you have somebody doing that once or twice a day, but you can replace that person with a probe that records the content or the chemistry of your water at any point in time. You can report on it. You can prove compliance with the health and safety regulations applicable in the region you operate in. And suddenly you realize that RegTech can be at the same time a very simple thing, but that can be used throughout an awful lot of industries.
Yeah. So would you say then that RegTech on its own right has been evolving over time or over the last few years?
Yeah, you see, but the last part of my last example, you don't see it that much yet. But when you take a look at the evolution of RegTech into finance, the good thing is that I can take a look not at a few years back, but I can take a look now at 2 decades back. It's something that evolved drastically. When I started my career, Regulation was more of a way of doing things and an understanding about what to do and not to do. By and large, a few laws, and that was about it. Then I moved into finance, and at that time in finance, which is one of the departments that is very much influenced by regulation, the only regulation that you had basically was to make sure that, well, you filed your account on time, but that has nothing special, but that you were complying with the Basel I rules for capital adequacy. That was it. And then if you take Belgium,
the Basel I, I never really got that.
I did. That's how old I am. But anyway, if you go back in time, you start to roll back to where we are now. You take a financial department and a compliance department. It started to implement reporting mechanism around taxes. Then you started to have the AML that came in. Then you have GDPR that came in, which is the last one. But it's just something that is been growing. The thing that you see also is that you have an underlying trend in society which goes along the codification of everything and anything. And whatever the industry you're in, that codification and that reporting about the codification of everything becomes more and more present. And that is basically the biggest evolution from an environment perspective around the RegTech. I also think that this is something that because data is so easily available, it will become less and less a problem asking people to report on some kind of regulation. And that aligns, that is what I've seen in the last couple of years, if I expand the spectrum wider than plainly the financial industry.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because excuse me, you see that, for example, in KYC, also a very driven or data-driven process nowadays, that suddenly becomes much more, well, the norm of a new society. And yeah, what do you think about that as an example?
As an example, if you go along the KYC, and actually you're running a little bit ahead of what I was supposed to talk about, but that's okay. But if you go along the KYC, KYC nowadays, you need to provide as a company a lot of information about who sits behind the company, what they do, what the company does. And then you give that to a financial institution or an auditor or a lawyer, and suddenly they come back to you with additional questions. That's when you realize that the technology, the data is there, and sometimes they have access to more data than you do. And they ask you a question and reveal facts to you that you didn't even know about.
Yeah.
That can be to some extent intrusive. That can be a problem. There is a lot of things that are supposed to be codified, but that are not actually understood the same way by the same people. And that is a problem, but that is a typical example of the extensive use of data and their application to the RegTech as understood in the financial industry.
So RegTech for you, is it, we kind of touched a little bit upon it before, but new, real, and beneficial? Is that, which one would you pick?
New, definitely not. In fact, for me, definitely not, because I'm coming from the financial world. So for me, regulation is like, I lived with it almost all my life.
So second, Jean-Christophe, to be regulations. That's what we are, bankers, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're all about regulations, nothing else. But anyway, that's a joke, but that's something else. So anyway, I think it becomes more and more real, but it becomes more and more real for, as I said, a lot of people. And I'm going to give you an example of link between the reality of the financial industry and the reality of a group of companies in the industrial world. If you have a holding, before you know it, you need to control the communication of data around your holding throughout your whole structure. And suddenly, something that was done over the phone between dessert and coffee, you need to organize it, you need to standardize it so that you are sure that your line of information, that the applicability of the laws and everything is adequate within your structure. So it is a reality into more and more industries. If you take again the restaurant business, try to open up a restaurant without having the specific description of all your procedures manual, all your procedures applicable to meet the standards. So it becomes more and more reality for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And now if you ask me, is it something that is beneficial, yes or no? Again, it's really dependent on how you use the tools that you have and what you make out of a regulation. So if you go back into the banking industry and you take the KYC rules, for example, if because you find something doing your KYC analysis ends up into blocking a client and asking him questions that creates a financial or an operational risk on his side, the only thing you do, you create frustration. If having this alert, you have a conversation with your client, you interact with him, you help him find a solution, you go and explain to compliance what happens, then suddenly you move your company from a process-oriented business towards a customer-oriented business, and you're in a completely different ballgame.
Yeah. Do you think that, well, the whole situation with COVID at the moment, as being a global pandemic, has an impact on this whole RegTech industry or RegTech evolution?
Yes and no. Yes, well, let's start by no. No, in the sense that the regulation has been there and COVID didn't change it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in the sense that we need to act more and more on a digital manner. And that triggers some changes into the way corporations in any type of industry operate. Give you an example, try to make a wiring of money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, people usually in the past were next to their bankers, they could move, try to fix it. Now everything is done electronically.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of change of habits, of processing habits into the people that were used to operate on the local basis. And I think that is where COVID has a drastic impact on everything, RegTech included.
Mm-hmm.
The practical example is try to get a wet ink document somewhere. It's not possible anymore. So you move towards more and more digital. So I don't think it creates an impact in terms of regulation. I think it will create an impact in terms of regulations and change of laws, because take the wet ink again, within 5 years, max, wet ink will be optional and other minimum standards will be mandatory. But it's a trend that we've already seen in other places. Take the KYC process in Luxembourg for opening a non-risk or low-risk account. Nowadays, you can open up a low-risk account on the basis of a video call.